one circuit of the cellular at ground level, one on the first gallery, half on the second, and on the 267th morning, daylight in the decanting room, independence existed, so called. But in the interval, Mr. Foster concluded, we've managed to do a lot of them. Oh, a great deal. His laugh was knowing and triumphant. That's the spirit I like, said the director once more. We'll walk around. You tell them everything, Mr. Foster. Mr. Foster told them of the growing embryos on its bed of peritoneum, made them taste the rich blood surrogate on which it fed, explained why it had to be stimulated with placentine and thyroxine, told them of the corpus luteum extract, showed them the jets through which at every 12th meter for 0 to 2040 it was automatically injected, spoke of those gradually increasing doses of pituitary administered during the final 96 meters of their course, described the artificial maternal circulation installed in every bottle at meter 112, showed them the reservoir of blood surrogate, the centrifuge pump that kept the liquid moving over the placenta and drove it through the synthetic lung and waste product filter, referred to the embryo's troublesome tendencies to anemia, to the massive dose of hog stomach extract and foetal foal's liver, in which, in consequence, it had to be supplied. Showed them the supply mechanism by means of which, during the last 2 meters out of every 8, all the embryos were simultaneously shaken into familiarity with movement, hinted at the gravity of the so-called trauma of decanting, and enumerated the precautions taken to minimize, by a suitable training of the bottled embryo, that dangerous shock, told them of the test for sex carried out in the neighborhood of meter 200, explained the system of labeling, a T for the male, a circle for the female, and for those who were destined to become free Martians, a question mark, black on a white ground. For of course, said Mr. Foster, in the vast majority of cases, fertility is merely a nuisance. One fertile ovary in 1200, they would really be quite sufficient for our purposes, but we want to have a good choice. And of course, one must always have an enormous margin of safety, so we allow as many as 30% of the female embryos to develop normally. The others get a dose of male sex hormone every 24 meters for the rest of the course. Result, they're decanted as free martins. Structurally quite normal, except, here he had to admit, they do have the slight tendencies to grow beards, but sterile. Guaranteed sterile. Which brings us at last, continued Mr. Martin, out of the realm of mere slavish imitation of nature into the much more interesting world of human invention. He rubbed his hands, for of course they didn't content themselves with merely hatching out embryos. Any cow could do that. We also predestine and condition. We decant our babies as socialized human beings, as alphas or epsilons, as future sewage workers, or future, he was going to say future world controllers, but correcting himself, said future directors of hatcheries instead. The DHC, the Director of Hatchery Center, acknowledged the compliment with a smile. They were passing meter 320 on rack 11. A young beta minus mechanic was busy with screwdriver and spanner on the blood surrogate pump of a passing bottle. The hum of the electric motor deepened by fractions of a tone as he turned the nut. Down, down, a final twist, a glance at the revolution counter, and he was done. He moved 2 paces down the line and began the same process on the next pump, reducing the number of revolutions per minute. Mr. Foster explained the surrogate goes down slower, therefore passing through the lung at a longer interval, therefore giving the embryos less oxygen. Nothing like oxygen shortage from keeping an embryo below par. Again, he rubbed his hands. But why do you want to keep an embryo below par? Asked an ingenuous student. Ass, said the director, breaking a silence. Hasn't it occurred to you that an epsilon embryo must have an epsilon environment as well as an epsilon heredity? It evidently hadn't occurred to him, as he covered with confusion. The lower the caste, said Mr. Foster, the shorter the oxygen. The first organ affected was the brain. After that, the skeleton. At 70% of normal oxygen, you got dwarf. At less than 70, eyeless monsters, who are no use at all, concluded Mr. Foster. Whereas his voice became confident and eager. If they discover a technique for shortening the period of maturation, what a triumph! What a benefaction to society! Consider the horse. They considered it. Mature at 6, the elephant at 10. While at 13, a man is not yet sexually mature and is only fully grown at 20. Hence, of course, that fruit of delayed development, the human intelligence. But in epsilons, said Mr. Foster very justly, we don't need human intelligence. Didn't need and didn't get it. But though the epsilon mind was mature at 10, the epsilon body was not fit to work till 18. Long years of superfluous and wasted immaturity. If the physical development could be sped up till it was as quick, say, as a cow's, what an enormous savings to the community. Enormous, murmured the students. Mr. Foster's enthusiasm was infectious. He became rather technical, spoke of the abnormal endocrine coordination, which made men grow so slowly, postulated a germinal mutation to account for it. Could the effects of this germinal mutation be undone? Could the individual epsilon embryo be made a revert by a suitable technique to the normality of dogs and cows? That was the problem, and it was all but solved. Plinkington at Mombasa had produced individuals who were sexually mature at 4 and full grown at 6.5. A scientific triumph. But socially useless. 6-year-old men and women were too stupid to even do epsilon work, and the process was an all or nothing one. Either you failed to modify at all, or else you modified the whole way. They were still trying to find out the ideal compromise between adults of 20 and adults of 6, so far without success. Mr. Foster sighed and shook his head. Their wandering through the crimson twilight had brought them to the neighborhood of meter 170 on Rack 9. From this point onward, Rack 9 was enclosed, and the bottles performed the remainder of their journey in a kind of tunnel, interrupted here and there by openings 2 or 3 meters wide. Heat conditioning, said Mr. Foster. Hot tunnels alternated with cool tunnels. Coolness was wedded to discomfort the form of hard X-rays. By the time they were decanted, the embryos had a horror of cold. They were predestined to emigrate to the tropics to be miners and acetate silk spinners and steel workers. Later on, their minds would be made to endorse the judgment of their bodies. We condition them to thrive on heat, concluded Mr. Foster. Our colleagues upstairs will teach them to love it. And that, put in the director sententiously, that is the secret of happiness and virtue. Liking what you've got to do. All conditioning aims at that, making people like their unescapable social destiny. In a gap between 2 tunnels, a nurse was delicately probing with a long, fine syringe into the gelatinous contents of a passing bottle. The students and their guides stood watching her for a few moments in silence. Well, Lenina, said Mr. Foster, when at last she withdrew the syringe and straightened herself up. The girl turned with a start. One could see that, for all the lupus and the purple eyes, she was uncommonly pretty. Henry! Her smile flashed redly at him, a row of coral teeth. Charming, charming, murmured the director, and, giving her 2 or 3 little pats, received in exchange a rather deferential smile for himself. received in exchange a rather deferential smile for himself. "What are you giving them?" asked Mr. Foster, making his tone very professional. "Oh, the usual typhoid and sleeping sickness. Tropical workers start being inoculated at meter 150, Mr. Foster explained to the students. The embryos still have gills. We immunize the fish against the future man's diseases." Then, turning back to Lenina, 10 to 5 on the roof this afternoon, he said, as usual. "Charming," said the director once more, and with a final pat, moved away after the others. On rack 10, rows of next generation's chemical workers were being trained in the tolerance of lead, caustic soda, tar, chlorine. The first of a batch of 250 embryonic rocket plane engineers was just passing the 1100 mark on 1100 meter mark on rack 3. A special mechanism kept their containers in constant rotation. "To improve their sense of balance," Mr. Foster explained. "Doing repairs on the outside of a rocket in midair is a ticklish job. Ticklish job. We slacken off the circulation when they're right way up, so they're half-starved, and double the flow of surrogate when they're upside down. They learn to associate topsy-turvydom with well-being. In fact, they're only truly happy when they're standing on their heads." "And now," Mr. Foster went on, "I'd like to show you some very interesting conditioning for Alpha Plus intellectuals. We have a big batch of them on rack 5. First, gallery level." He called to two boys who had started to go down to the ground floor. "They're round about meter 900, he explained. "You can't really do any useful intellectual conditioning till the fetuses have lost their tails. Follow me." But the director had looked at his watch. 10 to 3, he said. "No time for the intellectual embryos, I'm afraid. We must go up to the nurseries before the children have finished their afternoon nap." Mr. Foster was disappointed. "At least one glance at the decanting room," he pleaded. "Very well, then," the director smiled indulgently. "Just one glance." That's the end of chapter 1.